we are talking about controlling cash flow in your contracts. So, if you have ever had a big deal turn into a nightmare, felt underpaid halfway through a project, or chased an invoice that should have been really simple, or finished with a contract or a project and thinking this was way more than I agreed to, then one of two things is happening. Either one, your contract doesn't protect you the way that you think it does, or two, you're not enforcing your contract. Today, we're going to talk about the former. And we're going to walk through three critical areas within your contract that you should check to make sure that you are actually protecting your revenue. So let's jump in. But first, we are going to talk about who I am and why I'm talking to you here today. So, before law school, I was trained at Deloitte to identify weaknesses in businesses. I looked at businesses' systems, controls, and risks. And we're talking about big businesses. But when I opened my own law firm, I saw a really scary pattern. Founders, when they get under pressure, their agreements do not shield them. And comparing them to corporate contracts that I was used to in big law, the gap is exponential. Founders and entrepreneurs, they think they're protected when they have a contract, but when a dispute happens, it's actually devastating. So the real difference is one, I don't think that any contract should be less than 3 pages for the most part, but definitely not client service contracts. But really, corporations have contracts that are intentional. They make sure that they protect and control outcomes and making sure that their payment structures are built in. And like I said, founders, they want to just make sure that they look good, they look official, and nothing is really managing the client relationship and keeping it from souring. This is the biggest difference that I see between corporations and founders, entrepreneurs. So, what we're going to talk about today is how to fix those revenue leaks. There are three main areas that I generally see founders getting into trouble with and how we can protect them pretty easily. One is the way that money moves. Your contract should dictate how money moves from beginning to end and also make it match your actual workflow. So, the payment structuring, the timing, and any consequences, so that when something goes wrong or something happens, you're not left trying to figure out what do I do? What should I do? What's the best move? Second is where scope expands. I know scope creep is such a huge deal for founders, and the best way to prevent that is documentation, where everyone has an expectation. We come to the table and say, this is what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. Enforce those boundaries. And then third is when relationships changes. More importantly, how to prevent relationships from changing. So let's get into the first one, how money moves. Let's set the scene. So invoices are sent, payment is due, and then you don't get any payment. But you keep working because you assume I've got a contract, so they're going to pay me, right? So they're going to pay me, right? So you keep working. And 9 times out of 10, maybe not 9 times out of 10, but good clients, they'll generally pay when they have the money. But what you shouldn't rely on is when they have the money or eventually they'll pay. What you should rely on is the design that you have structured into your contract, into the deal structure. Your payment should flow with the deal structure. What does that look like? Your deposit should be connected to milestones. Do you get paid only after you finished all of your work? That doesn't seem fair to you, and it really doesn't make sense for a lot of the service businesses that I work for. When you connect your deposits, your payments to milestones, you are making sure that your client is happy with your services every step of the way, but also you're getting paid as you're actually doing the work. You need to have defined late terms. What is a late fee? When is late? If it's past the due date. Most companies, you can see in your contracts, like you've got a grace period, right? Even with your rent or your mortgage, you've got 15 days. For larger contracts, you might have 30 or 45-day payment terms. That's what late is. But that needs to be defined so that you know, hey, when this date hits, I'm stopping work. Late fees are enforced. There are other penalties and consequences depending upon what your workflow is. You need to have built in pause points so that you're not just doing work, hoping, guessing, praying that your client pays you. And also, when everything is documented, it makes it so much easier for you to point to the contract and enforce what it is you want done without seeming like the bad guy. So, where is your exposure? These are the questions you need to look at your contract and ask yourself. Do you get paid only after you've completed the work? What does your contract say? This maximizes your risk exposure to your cash flow because obviously, once they've received your services, they don't have to pay you, or they may feel like they don't have to pay you. So take a picture of this checklist and ask yourself, does my contract actually specifically and clearly state answers to all of these questions? If it says, oh, well, I've got a late payment or a 10% late fee will be applied. Is that monthly, per day? Is it compounded annually? How is this calculated? This needs to be specific. And you may say like, oh, my clients don't need that specificity. We'll talk about it. No, the best time to agree is when everyone is happy. When there's a dispute, nothing is going to be agreed upon. And then the court has to revise your contract, and no one wants that to happen. Second, scope creep. So I'm sure everyone has worked with a client that says, oh, I forgot to tell you one thing. Can we just add this contract? I don't like this material. Can we change it to this other material? I just need one more thing and then we're going to be done. It may feel small or seem small to them, and their request may sound reasonable, but then you start doing the work and think, my goodness, I didn't agree to this. This isn't what I planned on. Why? Because small changes stack up. You feel resentful to them, and it impacts your work because you didn't enforce boundaries. Why? You can't enforce boundaries that you never had in your contract. Your boundaries need to be designed into your contracts. So scope creep happens in two different parts. The first part is when your contract doesn't clearly define what is and is not included in your services. If you're a recruiter, you shouldn't just say, I'm going to source employees for you. How are you going to do that? When are you going to do that? What else includes sourcing clients? Are you going to vet them? Are you going to have a first initial interview? Are you going to review their resumes? All of these things need to be documented. And if you have a long list of services that you provide within the project, then you probably should have a statement of work, an SOW that accompanies a larger service agreement to outline what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. That's those milestones we talked about earlier, and the payment that goes along with each step of the process. When you have a statement of work, you're clearly defining what you are doing and what you're not doing. And what you're not doing is anything that's outside of the SOW. So when your client says, hey, I just need to add one more thing. Great. Absolutely. That's something I can help you with. What we initially agreed to, let's go look at the contract, is these set of services. That's going to be something different. This is considered a change order. So the second part of scope creep is when you don't define how to present scope changes and approve those scope changes. So you can do it in a conversation like we were just having. Hey, this is a change and we can do this extra service, but this is the fee. And so they say, oh, okay, well, I don't really need that. Or great, let's add it in. And you invoice for it. You invoice for it right then and right there. So looking at your contract, ask yourself, how do you want your clients to request something different? Sit and think about your workflow. However you want is how it should be in the contract. Not what works best for them, but works best for you. And then second, how do you approve and document those scope changes? Everything needs to be in writing, because when things start to change and expectations are not aligned, that's when you start to have disputes. When you have documentation about what's going on, when things are going on, what you have approved and did not approve, that's how you can go back and say, hey, we've already discussed this, and this is how we're going to move forward. And then also, it's just better in the long run if you do have any disputes that you need to prove for litigation or for settlement purposes, you have a documented record of the interactions with your clients. But then also sometimes, you've got great clients. They may be 10 or 20% of your annual revenue, or you just really enjoy working with them and you'll expand a little bit. I understand, and that's okay. But also understand that anything that is not in writing and anything that you or your client is assuming about your interaction, your margins are absorbing that gap. And for some clients, we're ready and willing to absorb those margins, but make sure that that's an intentional choice. The third thing may not be so obvious, but when your relationships start to spoil with your clients, that's really when disputes happen. Disputes don't usually happen with the clients that you've got that you're best buds with. They happen when something happens and you're not on the greatest of terms. So when you start to feel that energy shift, like, hey, we had a great relationship, we were talking, we had a great first call, and something just doesn't feel right anymore, communication starts to slow, and you may think like, okay, I just have to deliver the project and then I'm free. Once I deliver it, they'll see how great it is, they'll be happy, and everything will be done and they'll come back. Everything will be fine. But really, is it? Are you okay? Let's diagnose that issue. What caused the shift? Unmet expectations and silent disappointments are the beginning aspect of disputes. And whenever you have a dispute, you have revenue leakage. They don't want to pay. They may not pay. They're going to dispute something. You may have a chargeback. They may threaten litigation or reporting you to a regulatory body. So you have to hire your attorney and pay for attorney's fees and filing fees. And all of these are revenue leaks. And it started with unmet expectations and silent disappointments. So this is where contracts matter the most, because I guarantee you, whenever a client is unhappy, they're going back to the contract. They may not read it at the beginning, but they definitely will read it when they're unhappy and say, hey, what does this say they're supposed to do? How can I get out of this contract? What can I do? What do I have to do to make sure that I don't pay? Let me find the little loopholes so that I can get out of this because I'm unhappy. Yeah, they did the work, but because I'm unhappy, I don't want to pay. So you want to avoid that spoiled relationship. How do you do that? Documentation, aligning expectations from the very beginning. What does that look like? Yes, your contract is important. Yes, you want to make sure that you clearly define payment terms and clearly define what your services are so that everyone knows what you're agreeing to, when they're paying, when you're getting paid. But even if you're at the stage where I can't hire an attorney to make sure that everything is perfect, what you can do is document your workflow and your relationship. What does that look like? Onboarding. Hey, so great to begin this work with you. Here's how I'm going to get started. Next steps, we're going to have a call. Outline what's going to happen on that call. Outline steps 1, 2, 3, 4 until the end. You're going to pay here at this amount. I'm going to deliver this. All right, this project is taking a little bit longer. Let your clients know. When they feel involved in the process and like they are working with you to achieve the outcome, they are also taking responsibility for those outcomes. And they feel like you're a partner rather than an expense. And that's how you manage those relationships. So document. And when you remove assumptions, then you don't have misalignment. So again, where is the exposure? Is assumptions. Any unclear terms are going to put pressure on you when your client is unhappy. Document your onboarding, set the expectations before work begins, not during your disputes. If you start negotiating for revenue or services after a contract has already been signed without them agreeing, yeah, I'm ready for those services, go ahead and send me that invoice, then you're losing revenue because you're spending time on things that you never designed to spend time on. Identify clear next steps. What's going to happen when those milestones are. This slide, this relationship ties back to the first two things, your payment design and scope creep. Everything relates back to how you service your client. And servicing your client is the best way to prevent revenue leaks. It's not just about how well you provide for them, it's about how well you tell them you're going to provide for them. And then the last two things, give them status update via documentation, via email, text, some way, and have client check-ins. If your project is definitely over 30 days, you want to have regular meetings once or twice throughout the engagement where you talk about, this is what step I'm on. Does this meet your expectations? And make sure that there are no surprises once you get to the end so that everyone is happy. So let's review again what things you should be looking for. Take a picture of this when you're going through your contracts. Controlling cash flow is all about making sure that you can answer these questions so that when your client goes back to the contracts, they understand what they should and what you should or not do, what you should do and not do. So first, if payments stop tomorrow, what's your next move? Is that in the contract? Do you have leverage to stop working and make sure that you get your funds? Or do you just have to keep working and hope that they'll pay? Do you get paid before, during, or after you complete the work? The best case scenario, especially for service providers and professional services, is milestones. Either get paid up front. If you are someone like a lawyer, for instance, there is a regulatory body that governs my ethics. So if I don't provide my services and my clients have already paid me, then there's a regulatory body that they can call. If you're in a regulated industry, get paid up front. You deserve it. You've earned it. If not, have milestones. 10 or 25% deposit up front, 50% in the beginning or in the middle, and then the rest at the end. Everyone is on the same page. Where could your client make assumptions about your workflow? Is there a piece of your workflow that your client doesn't know that you're doing? Hey, this part is going to take much longer than every other section of your work. Communicate that to them so that they know, oh, okay, I haven't heard from him because he's deep in the weeds. She is working on something really hard, so I know that I'm going to hear from her when there's an update. Let them know so they're not sitting over there thinking you're just twiddling your thumbs. And then lastly, these are all of the things that make sure that you keep your relationship from souring. So if any of these answers feel uneasy, then that's when it's time to revamp your contracts and revamp your documentation. But if you feel, hey, I've got a pretty good handle on all of these things, great. You are in a great place. And that's where you want to be. You want to make sure that your contracts are not leaking revenue. So if you've had a deal that's drained you and you've thought, this is the last time I need to do something different, let's talk. Thank you guys for coming to my presentation. I am so happy to talk to you guys. If there are any questions, you can